Top of the evening, I see you came back. There's a lot of material tonight. We're going to try to get right through it. To begin with, I'll just go quickly for about 3 minutes on what you've learned in the first couple sessions. My dad is going to show a movie of the 100th anniversary parade in 1927 in Northville. So you can look at the downtown, it'll be exactly like it is today almost. Civil War veterans and others marching in the parade. It's kind of neat. So that will be the first session. And then the second part, my dad will do an overview of different activities around Northville. Some he touched on before, but I think you'll find it pretty interesting. We might go just a little bit long, but bear with us now. I try to keep it within the hour. So with that, let's go through. Yes, ma'am.
Video now, later.
Not quite yet. Almost ready for the video, if you would hang on. So let's see if they gave me a new fancy changer here, which should work, right?
Where's your trick?
Point at this.
There we go. So reviewing, we started the first session, early roads, sports parks, and other things. Talked about my father. He's won a lot of different awards in town. He's written a lot of the books. A question came up to answer, he is 98 years old right now. So let you know. I thought he was 96, 95, but he's 98. This is where he grew up on Fairbrook on the left side. My mother grew up on High Street and Dunlap. That's where the original Our Lady of Victory services used to be at her house. This was the old Ambler Hotel on Main Street and Center. We talked about that, about the streetcars coming through the middle of town. This is very early on Northville, all dirt roads and horse and buggies. We talked about the area of Wall Lake and the wall around it and where Indians used to come. This gives you an idea. A lot of activities we talked about. My parents in the 30s and 40s would go to Tommy Dorsey and all the big bands would come there in the big dance hall. So, and speedboat races, and even when I was a kid, there was an amusement park and there was roller coasters and other things, just the remnants of it by then. Again, talked about Balboa Lake, used to be about where Center Street is and 7 Mile, where 7 Mile cuts through. That was all underwater. Fairbrook Street was 7 Mile. That's how you got through town to go out towards Mayberry, towards Beck Road. That was all underwater. There used to be a Diamond One there. You can see all the trees growing in there, but we talked a little bit about that. Some of the larger homes around Northville, the Chase Mansion on one side, who was an industrialist. On top of Hillside, where Hillside School is, used to be the high school, this was East Lawn Sanitarium. That was Buckner Hill. That was a huge mansion, the front of the house, and then later on they added on where the sanatorium. That was a private sanitarium, where out at Mayberry was a public one. Talked about the ski hill. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Talked about the Northville Electric shop, where my father owned that moved from the old facility, which is on the latest cover of the History of Northville book, to where Baby is, and Dillinger actually broke in where Baby is. That was a hardware store, the Ware Building, 1929. Dillinger broke into it, stole all the guns, stole a lot of the activities, the merchandise in there, didn't have any insurance. So my grandfather was fortunate enough to buy the building, and they moved the Northville Electric shop down to that until the mid-60s. We talked about mills. Every town had a mill in the area. And a lot of towns around here. Northville, again, remember it was the North Village in that township. You had Phoenix, you had Meads Mill, and that is not the Meads. Meads Mill is where Meads Mill School is today. That was the whole town. And why didn't the town survive? Church. You didn't have a church. In Phoenix, past that, another town. They were as big as Northville, but Northville survived and Plymouth survived on the other side. We talked about the Gold Cure House, and we talked a little bit about, this was the dormitory to the Gold Cure House there by the Early Bird across from the Presbyterian Church and Starbucks. There's a lot of activity going on in that right now. Should they demolish it? Somebody's bought it. Kind of tough once you bring a building down to bring it back. So there's a little history back to that. I'll leave it with that. Hang on, see if this catches up to me. It's getting there. I think I'm faster than the clicker. my assistants. So there we go. We talked about this area. It was all timbered, and you know how it first got subdivided out back in about the mid-1830s or so. Let's see. And then we talked about how the streets have changed a little bit very early, Model A's and now the 1950s there, and about how the, where are we, the western section over by Orchard Heights, a lot of maple trees. In fact, we have the largest maple tree in front of our house today on Eaton Drive. They used to tap all these for maple sugar out there. My dad told the story about how he used to tap a lot of the trees too. So that was up in that area. Talked about the stagecoaches. The original mail was brought into Northville once a week starting from the 1830s on a stagecoach, and then they would sort it out. Then the next week they would bring it in too. So that was that significance. Streetcars, my dad talked about going on the streetcars and getting a pass and going up to Pontiac and going to Detroit. Kind of the early realm of mass transportation. You get down to Detroit in under an hour. You know, so that's pretty good with stops, because they would go 55 miles an hour once they got up and going. Sports parks, my dad talked about all the different sports parks where the racetrack is. They used to play football before his time. He played right where you go into the Parkway and then Ford Field. So we talked a little bit about that. Talked about Lover's Lane, that's another story. And then this is Northville Golf Course, and Northville Golf Course is where the Purple Gang used to hang out. That was on 7 Mile and Newburgh, and somebody brought in a little pamphlet about Northville Golf Course, showed it to me tonight too. So that was something that they used to have in the 20s. All the senior proms were there. Even when I was younger, we used to play golf, and it was exactly like it was in the 20s and 30s. You know, the big ballroom with the big palm trees of all plastic and stuff. It was kind of neat. It was going into yesteryear. Questions from last week. So that was 2 weeks. We condensed it up pretty good for you. A couple questions that came up, and I said we'll answer questions at the beginning of the next session. What did my father do? My father, his father, of course, was an electrician in Northville. My father was trained as an electrician but didn't get certified at that. He ended up buying that business from my grandfather. So we're babies. That was the Northville Electric shop up until when I was a kid. So it was there for about 70 years. So he ended up retired from Sears in management because the problem, the opportunity, because there's no problems in life, when all the malls came in, it's kind of tough to sell all the appliances versus the malls. So they actually, the Northville Electric shop, had a shop here and one up in Williamston, and they wired all the original homes between here and Williamston, all the farms at 1900. So that was, you know, they had all the trucks and all the wiring equipment. If you have an old house in Northville, that knob and tube, you know, wiring, they probably did it. So that's what he did. That answers somebody's question. A couple of you asked me, were the youngsters punished for Halloween? Okay, so last week I went over it quickly. Halloween, it really wasn't trick-or-treating until after World War II. Before that, it was more like Devil's Night, you know, and everybody would come out and soap the windows, you know, on the night before. The gentlemen, the young boys would go out sometime on Halloween, but usually the women didn't. That's what the young girls did. Even up when I was young, the kids would go around and soap windows and put wax all over, and it wasn't quite as nice in the Norman Rockwell Northville as you see it today. So just to let you know, he went through some of the stories and throwing some eggs and what have you. But and somebody said, well, how about the golden rule? Well, you got to remember, up until just recently, on Devil's Night, there's 400 or 500 fires in the city of Detroit. You know, now it went down to 40 some, you know, for Devil's Night. But all the kids would, you know, they'd dump over outhouses, as my father alluded to, and they would throw eggs and what have you, and soap all the windows of the Northville Electric shop. So that answers that question. And one last question. Somebody asked about, talked about this in this area. Southeastern Michigan, there's about 10,000 Indians, you know, between the Chippewa and the Odawa, or Ottawa, depending. They say Ottawa as you go north, you know, up by Harbor Springs, what have you. There was Indians, definitely, when there's settlers here. If you look at the material around here in the library, you can get more information on that. But there were Indians, but you didn't see them very often. You know, all these trails we talked about, the roads, Grand River, Pontiac Trail, Ann Arbor Trail, those were Indian trails that they put roads on. I hope I They don't say trails for fun on there. So from that, Indians around here, mostly Chippewa on the river, and the Chippewas went all the way up to northern Michigan on Lake Michigan, so I'm told. There's a librarian here, Wendy, which will elaborate on all that, and they have all the information and books here for you. So I believe that's all the questions that we had that came in. And if you have any questions, at the end of the night, just see Wendy. Wendy, wave your hand to everybody, and we'll try to answer those next time. There's about 50 or 60 books here. We will make more of the library. Well, that's when my father turned 95. I put a little bit together, some book excerpts and some history of, him and activities. We will get more for you, and if you're not going to be here for the next couple weeks, just tell Wendy and we'll get one to you sometime or stop by. So it's been overwhelming. There's a waiting list to come in here. My dad appreciates your time and talents coming here and to listen to some of the creative stories of life. With that, we would love to see the video of the 100th anniversary of Northville. So what you're going to see right now, in 1927 was the 100th anniversary of Northville as a community. My dad was about an 8-year-old on the streets, and you're looking and they think they see him, but his parents were driving a Model T truck as a float in the 1927 parade, and he'll allude about that. So it's kind of neat. Take a look in your mind what it is downtown. It's the same then. With that, Wendy, cue it up if you can.
Can you knock some of the lights down across the way?
We can. When the presentation is on, we'll keep it on because they're taping it and they couldn't see my father, when we're doing that. But we will do the lights wherever the lights are once you put, there we go. Is that better back there?
Yes.
And I'm not going to use a microphone because I'm pretty loud. There'll be two on my father. This is very rare footage. So if you recognize some of the buildings. That's the old fire truck. It is. That's the new fire truck. And that's my
mother and
father's.
father right there. It's my mother.
Okay.
That's Eddie Stinson, his airplane. Eddie Stinson. Center Street now.
You'll see a couple different streets. That's why you might see the same thing, but there's different streets it's going down.
That's an electric car.
Wow.
There's my mother. Eddie Simpson again.
Would you like to talk any more about the movie?
On the movie, my father's driving this old Model T truck. And my mother is on the back of the truck with an old washing machine. And it says right on it, buy your wash machines at Northville Electric. I was so happy and so proud to see them in the parade, so real thrilled. I had never seen it until just a few years ago. This movie was, this video was taken from a movie that was sent into Northville at the city hall, and given to the manager of the city of Northville. And when I saw it, I said, make me a copy just like it, please. So he did, so this is a copy.
It's on VHS tape in the sense that digitized, it's on a thumb drive, but technology has gone to the next level.
When did they start having movies like that?
Well, because Henry Ford was involved, I think he had a couple cameramen down there. So this was 1927. Remember, there was the silent movies, and that was in the teens and the 20s and what have you too. So whenever the movie started in Hollywood, you know, the projector. So it came from, you know, projector or reel-to-reel. You're on. Ski jump hill.
Okay. Oh, I don't talk quite as fast as Brian does. So anyhow, in 1920, Northville was the ski jump capital of the state of Michigan. And there's 6 Hall brothers that built the tower in Northville for the ski jumping. And the ski jumping, do you want to tell them where the ski jump hill was?
So we talked a little bit about this in a previous session. The ski jump hill, if you were at Northville Downs and you went towards where the parkway starts, Hines Drive, up to the right, that hill, that's where this tower is built, about a 75-foot tower. The landing strip, if you envision, would be from that corner going towards Good Time Party Store, where McDonald Ford used to be. Think about it. That's a very straight little section of road. That was the landing strip after being in the air for 150 feet or so. So again, if you're coming from Northville Downs and you're going east towards Livonia, the Hines Drive is right on your right-hand side. Stop right at that intersection. Look to your right. That is a pretty steep hill. That's the back of the hill that you see on 7 Mile and Sheldon. And on top of that steep hill, they built a platform to go up. So you got the scoop, and then you came down. And again, next time you drive down there, envision that's the landing strip. It's a very straight, flat area between Hines Drive and Northville Road. Yes?
When did they tear it down?
Well, my dad might tell you a little story about that. So if he doesn't, I'll answer that.
Anyhow, seeing that Northville was the ski jump capital of the state of Michigan, on Sundays, it was so popular that the cars would back up all the way from Northville to Farmington Road to try to get into Northville to see the ski jump hill. And it was a boon to the businessmen in Northville for all the restaurants and the clothing stores. Everybody stayed open, and it was so popular, and the cars would park right inside of the circle where the racetrack is at the present time. And they used to charge $1 a carload to come in. And of course, $1 in those days was quite a bit. But you had to be inside your car for the $1. You couldn't stand on the running board. If you get on the running board, you'd have about 10 people, 3 deep inside and on the outside on the running board. But it was a big deal for Northville to have such good ski jumpers. And the ski jumpers, I was about 5 years old. I keep thinking I remember them jumping, but maybe not. But the tower was about 60 feet tall, but the skiers and jumpers, they had to take the skis and tie them on their back and then go up a ladder all the way to the top of the tower and get up there and then get on their skis and come down the hill. And they would jump about 125 to 135 feet. They would take off that tower and land, like Brian was saying, down at the bottom. A few years ago, when I was a little younger, I thought, I'm going to try to climb that hill. So I parked my car and I climbed the hill, and I had to grab on grapevine bushes and trees and everything else. And I finally made it to the top of the hill, and it's almost straight up. And when I got up there, I could see the 4 spots of the concrete where the tower was when the Hall boys were here. They kept on jumping, and Henry Hall was the best of the 6 skiers and the ski jumpers, and he set a world's record out in British Columbia back in 1922, and he jumped 223 feet. And at that time, it was a world's record. Nobody had ever jumped that far up any kind of a ski jump hill. If you go up to northern Michigan, Henry Hall, in the Hall of, what do you call it, the
Ski Jump Hall of Fame
Yeah, right.
in the Upper Peninsula.
In the Upper Peninsula. And he's up there, and all about his adventures, and his pictures and everything else up there. And if you're ever up there, you can go to the Hall of Fame of ski jumpers, and he's up there in the tower, in the Hall of Fame. But just one little story about my sister and I. We thought we would be ski jumpers. So we talked my mother into getting the 1933 Ford out, 4-door, and it was a real heavy snowstorm in Northville, and so we got a couple of clotheslines and hooked them on the back of the bumper, right down on 222 Fairbrook. That's where we started. In the early days, they never salted the roads. They just threw a little sand at the stop streets. So anyhow, so we got on our skis and talked my mother into it. We got a couple of clotheslines and hooked them out of the bump of the back. And my sister, she got on her skis and I got on my skis. I guess I was probably about 12 years old and my sister was 14. And so we went down through Hines Parkway Drive on our skis. And we were doing pretty good. It's like going behind a speedboat now. But my mother was going about 10 or 15, maybe 20 miles an hour. But that's really flying. So we had a great time skiing behind the car. And I saw a big pile of snow, and I thought, hey, I'm gonna be like those Hall brothers. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ski jump right over that big pile of snow. The only trouble was, when I went into the snow, it was a bunch of fence wire. Oh. And of course, my skis went into the fence wire and snapped in half. Oh. And I went airborne, hanging out of the rope. And my mother stopped to let me gather myself up. So that was the end of our ski jump. But if you go by my house at Christmas time, Brian always gets my cross-country skis out, and they're in front of the house. He puts a spotlight on them. So I still have my cross-country skis, but I don't use them much anymore.
Right on Eaton Drive over by OLB. His skis are on display with a spotlight every year.
Show the jumper there, maybe some people don't realize the jumper with his arms out.
Oh yeah, this is the jumper right here. I think I even have a little, that is the jumper. So he is in midair heading straight. So this would be Northville Road coming into town. Whoops, I hit something. And he's on top of that ski jump hill. And today, just to cap that off, there is a plaque on top of that hill on the backside, you know, where that nice little walkway is from Sheldon and 7 Mile. there's a walkway, but if you walk up that hill, the backside of it, there should be a plaque, I believe, I've been told, that says the ski jump hill. So, and that, again, in the early 20s and what have you, they used this as the ski jump hill. My father used to mess around there, and even he's told the story about going down on his ice skates in the late 20s and early 30s. When I was a kid, 50 years ago, there were still remnants of where the tower used to be. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find the tower and the concrete today, but it was something for Northville to have at one time. Okay, Mr. Turnbull. Let's see if we, where's my assistant of life? They got a new changer today for you at the library. Kind of like the old changer here. Old great assistant of the universe. I don't know if this is changing or not. Let's see.
I did that. That was not his remote.
If you could, well, you know what? I bet we can do it manually. Oh, I think it has a little sidebar there. Apologize for technical difficulties. We can get rid of the sidebar. Yeah, there we go. Let's see if this works. There we go. Thank you. The Northville Fair.
Before World War II, Northville had what they call the Wayne County Fair. Maybe some of you people were at it. But anyhow, it's a 6-day fair, and it was the biggest fair in the state of Michigan outside of the state fair. And they had a great big midway, and right on the midway, they had Ferris wheels, and they had merry-go-rounds, and they had all different things. They also had a tent that said, "Come and see this person, half man, half woman." And I tried to go in there, but they wouldn't let me in. And you had to be 18 years of age to go in and see the half man, half woman. I thought that would be quite nice. My father had a booth down there, and he sold a lot of things from the Northville Electric shop. Actually, all the business people had booths down. They had a large building for all the business people. But they had a chicken house, they had a cow barn, they had a horse barn, they had a pig barn, they had a sheep barn. And during the daytime at the fair, I went to the fair every day till I got a free pass because my father had a booth down there. But during the fair, besides the vaudeville going on and everything else, also during the fair there, when I was in high school in 1937, I went over to Ann Arbor and rented a tent and brought it over there, and we had a booth right on the fairgrounds down there. And in the 5 days, we had their mothers brought us in pies and cakes, and we sold hot dogs and hamburgers, and in 5 days we made $700.
Wow. That's a lot of money back then.
We were making money to go to Washington, and $700 back in 1937 was a lot of money. But during the fair, in the afternoon, they always had horse races, harness horse races. They had 8 races. And while the races were going on, they had a baseball game on inside the track. Then they had vaudeville, horse racing, baseball games, so something was going on all the while. At night, they'd have the vaudeville show on all over again, and then they usually have horses out there and having different races with the horses up and down in front of the tracks. And they'd have different horses and going in between the pillars there. And so they had a horse race. They timed them to see how fast the horses could go. They'd go about 200 yards up and 200 yards back. So there's a lot of entertainment. And then when it came 10 o'clock at night, they had fireworks. And then they had an hour of fireworks until 11 o'clock at night. So you can see it was a great time for fairgrounds. And everybody enjoyed it. And everybody, all the kids in Northville look forward to it from year to year.
Brian, was this Wayne County Fair on the racetrack property?
Right where it is. Even when I was a kid, back in the late 60s, what have you, they had a Wayne County Fair. There's a big Northville Fair that was still there. They don't do that. Right on the parking lot of where Northville Downs is today. And the track, Northville Downs, they did a lot of that harness track. And inside that track, which is a half-mile track, they would have the baseball games. That was there. Absolutely. That track we talked about last time, that was the original sports park before my father's time. That's where they played football in the middle of that. And that's where they practiced their track around that. So, yeah, that's been there a long time, you know, the Northville sports park. Let's see if we can get to the next one.
Notice all the men with ties. Yeah. And the ladies with hats.
Oh. There we go. The fish hatchery.
Northville had the United States Fish Hatchery. It's right up where we're right now. It's where the tennis courts are on 7 Mile Road. And the superintendent's house was on the north side of 7 Mile Road. And the superintendent's house is still there. And it's a beautiful home on 7 Mile Road.
With the little pond in front of it today. That is on the north side of the road.
And in this building here, where the superintendent had his office upstairs, and down in the basement, they had about 6 to 8 women down there working all year long, summer and winter, and they were extracting the fish eggs out of the fish, and they had little bins all over, and they're hatching and getting these little baby fish and trying to raise them. And once they got them raised big enough, then they had like little lakes. They had 8 of them all around up where the baseball field is right now. And what they would do when the fish got big enough, they would take the fish from that house and take them out and put them in the ponds and let the fish start to grow. And the workmen were out there working to take care of the 7 different ponds. The ponds are about as big as a hockey rink. And they could be anywhere between 4 foot deep up to 8 feet deep. And so the workmen who were working out there always carried a shotgun along with them in his wheelbarrow, because the birds would come in and they would try to get these little fish. And so when they see seagulls and different fish in, they would start popping at them, so to keep them around. So then when the fish got big enough, they would drain the ponds, and then they would take nets and gather up the fish. They would have bass, they would have bluegill, they would have pike, all different types of fish. And then they put it in milk cans full of ice, and then they take it in the truck and take it up in northern Michigan and dump it in the lakes. That's the way they moved it. At the present time, they use an airplane now. They do the same thing, but they have an airplane. Just go up there and open up the airplane and the towers there, and just let the fish go into the lakes. I have one of the milk cans, in front of my house now, and it says United States Fishery, and it's a regular old milk can. I'm real proud of that.
And just to give you the vision again, if you know the Fish Hatchery Park, this is a road that goes down, see how that goes down to where the baseball fields are in the back. This is on the south side of the road. And as my father mentioned, yes, sir.
I got a little bit more to add on.
I know you do. I was trying to cap it off. Go right ahead.
The most important part, they had 8 ponds, and they have 1 pond for a swimming pool. So all of us kids, they would have the 1 pool, and they'd have it about 4 feet deep, and it was big. And that was our swimming pool all summer long. We had a free swimming pool. I never saw too many adults up there, but all the kids in Northville, that was our swimming pool. They left 1 pond open for us. In the wintertime, the pond turned to ice. And that was our ice skating rink for all winter long. I know one day I was up there skating, I was about 10 years of age, and you had to take your glasses off and put them there, and then put on your ice skates and skate. And I came home, I said to my mother, "Mother, I am so cold." And she said, "Well, why are you so cold?" Well, I said, I got ready to come home, and I went to get my glasses, and the older boys had a hockey game going on, and they're using my glasses for goal posts. And she said, "Well, why didn't you just get us over there and get them?" Oh, I said I couldn't until they scored a goal. So anyhow, she said, "I'll be so."
Great. Again, there's 1 pond there today, and imagine about 8 or 9 ponds bigger than that. You know, there's a pond where you go in, and even when I was small, 50 years ago, there were swim lanes where they used to put the fish. You know, imagine a long swim lane type pool. They would separate them out, and a couple of those ponds are there, and different buildings. So this is on the south side of the road, right where you go down. We'll see if this works again.
What happened to that building?
They raised it, I think, in about 1973.
It didn't burn down.
It did, well, they burned it. I think the Northville Fire Department raised it. Salem train crash.
Okay. Get this right here. July the 20th, 1907. Up in, the train was up and coming down. They had 800 people on the train from Ionia. And they're all employees from the Pure Marquette Railroad. They were coming down from Ionia to go to Belle Isle for a picnic for the 800 people. They, coming down, they were supposed to be in Northville at a certain time, and their workmen were over by Plymouth, just south of 5 Mile Road on the railroad. And so one of the workmen said to the boss, "I think we better get off the track." "No," he said, "we got 15 more minutes to go." He read the directions wrong. They didn't have any time to go. The first thing they knew, why, they heard the train whistle coming at 60 miles an hour down on Napier and 5 Mile Road. That's where they blew the whistle. And he said, "Oh my God, here comes the train." So they jumped. They had 30 seconds for the workmen to get away from the tracks. So the workmen jumped off and got away from the tracks. The train came around the curve. If you go out there anytime, you'll see there's a curve right in the road on Napier Road. So the train came around the track, and oh my God, here was another engine, coming right with them. And I thought, oh wow, so they put on the air brakes, but of course it was too late. And with 800 people in those beautiful old railroad cars, passenger cars, that are beautifully done and very, very elaborate, but they're all made out of wood. And so the trains came together, and the cars doubled up and went up in the air and crashed, and 34 people died from the train wreck, and 100 of them were injured. And what a sad, sad deal. And so the doctors from Northville, there were 3 doctors in Northville and 3 doctors in Plymouth, and the doctors rushed out there as quickly as they could and took the ones that were injured over on the north side of the tracks. And on the south side of the tracks, they gently took the bodies out and put them on the side of a hill in the grass and left them out there temporarily. And they ran out of bandages. Imagine trying to bandage up 100 people that were injured. One man who was crushed under a lot of rubbish from the crash, he said, "Hey, if anybody can hear me," he said, I have a revolver in my boot. Please come and shoot me." He said, I'm in so much pain, I can't stand it. But nobody came, but he died without being shot. Got some more.
I know you do.
Got something you want to
It was the worst train wreck in the history of the United States up to that point. And it's a Salem train wreck, but it's really in Northville Township area. So just, yes, the last part of it.
So right away, as quickly as they could, they assembled a train in Detroit. With one passenger train was all full of nurses and doctors and bandages. And then they had 2 more cars, passenger cars, for the wounded. And then they had another car in the back for the poor people who didn't make it. And then they had a couple more cars added on because the ones who were injured, sometimes their fathers and mothers, and they wanted to go to the hospital with them in Detroit. So as soon as they could, they sent that train out to Plymouth and Northville to pick up the ones who were still alive. They sent another train from Ionia to come down to pick up the people who were not injured. And so they got down there and picked up those later in the afternoon, but they ran out of bandages before the train got out from Detroit, and 300 or 400 women from Ionia ripped off their underclothes and made bandages out of their slips and different clothes for the bandages. I think that's pretty.
I think that's good.
Pretty much of it. What a train wreck.
Again,
and what a sad, sad deal. Like Brian was saying, it was the worst train wreck they've ever had in the state of Michigan.
And really, in the country at that time, it's kind of like what we just went through in Las Vegas. It was that kind of news. And there's a lot of information here at the library. Yes, Mr. Turnbull.
Just call me Bruce.
Okay.
Out of 100 people that were injured, about half of them never was 100% right. They're invalid all the rest of their lives. That's,
Didn't have trauma centers
Did not.
like they do.
Mayberry Sanitarium.
okay. Mayberry Sanatorium, the main entrance in Mayberry Sanatorium is on 7 Mile Road. At the present time, out at Mayberry State Park, it's off from 8 Mile Road. But in the times when they had tuberculosis sanatorium out there, it was off 7 Mile Road. It had a big arch there, and it had right on Mayberry Sanatorium. Prior to that, Mr. Mayberry got a hold of a farmer who lived next door. He said, bring over your team of horses and a plow. And they said, why? He said, just bring it over. So he said, follow me. So the farmer said, okay. So Mr. Mayberry started walking from 7 Mile Road almost up to 8 Mile Road. That park is 900 acres over there. It's a pretty good sized park. And so Mr. Mayberry, he started walking back and forth, and the farmer said, how come you don't go straight up for the future road? He said, I know anybody to speed. So if you're out there any time right now on your bicycle or walking down to 7 Mile Road, you'll see that road goes back and forth. And Mr. Mayberry, that's the way he won.
Yeah, the bike paths today are the roads that used to go through there. If you walk there, there's big signs of all the different buildings. It was a city in itself.
But on this one story there by the front gate, this lady came in an ambulance, bringing her in from Detroit with tuberculosis. Individually, in the early days for tuberculosis, the only way to get over it was fresh air and sunshine. And Northville had lots of fresh air and sunshine and hilly. And so and people who would go in there, they might be there for 6 months or a year with fresh air and sunshine and good food. And sometimes, I think maybe 25 to 30% would make it. The rest of them died from tuberculosis. But anyhow, this lady got up to the gate and she said, hold it, I'm not going in there. And they said, you gotta go in, you got tuberculosis. She said, it says Mayberry. May bury me now or may bury me later. I'm not going in.
The plane crash on Keys.
Well, I got some more to tell. So anyhow, just a little bit about Mayberry Park. It was really a city within a city. And half the people of Northville worked out there. The other half worked at the Ford Valve factory in Northville and some of the other factories. But it was so big out there, the main building out there, we had 800 people, patients going in there. And that's as big as the University of Michigan is. So you imagine the one building for tuberculosis as big as the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor. When I was in business in Northville, people would call up from Detroit, and up until 1976. And they would say, we had an appliance store and we sold radios and televisions. She said, would you take a television set out to Mayberry State Park, or Mayberry Tuberculosis Sanatorium? And so I got a brother out there, I got a mother out there, I got a father out there. So I would take the television sets. None of my employees would take it out. They were afraid they'd get tuberculosis. So I'd go out there and take the television, usually a little 12-inch Motorola. We'd take it out there and put it in the room, and the patient would go over on one side and all covered up with with gauze, and I had to put the gauze on and a white jacket on, and I'd go over there and hook up the television, and sometimes it's the first time that any of those patients had ever seen television, and they were so happy to get it. Up until 1976, the fresh air and sunshine was the only way to get over tuberculosis, or toward the end, they would take a lung and they would close the lung down and let it cure, and that would cure it, and then they pump that lung back up, and then they'd start the other lung and close that lung down. But in 1976, they came out with a medicine called streptomycin. And they got better medicine now, but as soon as they got that out there, they cured the tuberculosis. And then that's why the tuberculosis Mayberry closed down, and also the one here in Northville closed down, two tuberculosis sanatoriums.
Good story. The plane crash on Katy Street, that was closer to 1950s.
I'm trying to think the date, must have been about 1975,
For what?
the airplane crash.
No, in the late 50s. Late 50s, 1950s.
Okay, John. Anyhow, this airplane, this jet airplane with the Army flyer came over Northville and is having engine trouble. So this Army pilot said, "Hey, I'm not going to crash with this airplane. I'm going to get out of here." So he aimed the airplane toward South Salem. And he jumped out in his parachute. And he came down in Hines Parkway Drive. Well, that silly airplane got halfway to South Salem with nobody in it, and it turned around and came back. And it came right over Northville. And it got over Northville, and it got right over on Katy Street, and went right straight up until it ran out of fuel, or pretty much out of fuel. I think it had one tank left. And then it turned around and come all the way down. We lived within a block of where the crash was, and my wife heard it coming down, just screaming coming down, right on Katy Street. These two nice little old ladies had a yard on Katy, on the north side of Katy Street, and the yard was 125 feet deep and 50 foot wide. Jet airplane wings are 50 foot wide, and that plane luckily came right down straight in the middle of her backyard and knocked a hole as deep as this room here into the ground. When it hit, it just took fuel and blew it around and set a couple of houses on fire on Katy Street. There were two little children over on Rogers Street playing, and so when it hit, the chief of police in Northville, he said, where was the plane crash? And he said where it was. He said, oh my gosh, he said, that's right out in my backyard. I have a home on Katy, on Rogers Street. So he quickly came down, and when the plane hit, his two little children were caught on fire. And so they were burning, and so they took them to the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor, and they're there for months and months and months, and they finally lived, but they're invalids all the rest of their lives. The chief of police said to his 10-year-old wife, you heard the plane coming down, why didn't you get out of there? And he said, well, my little sister had her foot caught in the root of a tree, and she said, help me, help me. So he went back to help her, And that's when the rain hit, and set them on fire.
My father told this story at the Methodist church. There's a few hundred people, and right next to where it came down was the Angel house, and Jean Angel, who is now senior now, she's probably 80, she was working at the bank, and somebody called her, the plane came down on Katie, and she ran all the way home to see if it was her mother-in-law that was there. But she knew, she remembered it distinctly, and that day, my older brothers, which are much older, they were playing baseball, and they saw that plane come down. They talk about that too.
Katie is right out here. Right here.
So where are we? So Katie is right here. So it's between Rogers Street and what is that? First Street? On the left-hand side, on the north side, 3 down from where the school property is, on the north side. So that's, yeah, right around the corner from here. You would have heard and seen that come down in a blaze. The gold treatment house.
In the early days in Northville, they found out that if you had gold tablets, it would save you from drinking and having dope and opium and everything else. But you had to take your gold tablets. So that blue house on Main Street, right across from the old high school, right across from the senior center, why, that's where the doctor lived. The patients would come in and see him, and if they wanted to stay a week, they would be down on that house on East Main Street. And it's the one in the Northville Record right now, that they're talking about tearing it down. Maybe read the Northville Record. But that's where the patients would go in there and spend a whole week.
That was the dormitory house that we saw at the very beginning. That's where they stayed the night, and they had their gold treatment. They would take gold pills, and that was supposed to cure you from ailments, alcoholism, drug abuse, and what have you. They came from all over for the drug cure, but they would stay here for a month or so.
Well, it was about $25 a week, and that was an awful lot of money. Because a person could live for 4 people for buying all their groceries in those days for $5. So with the $25 to get over the gold treatment, to quit smoking and drinking and all these other things, was well worth it. I heard this recently. A friend of mine said, I got to go to Ann Arbor. He said, why? He said, I got to take some gold treatments. So right now, he's going to Ann Arbor to take some gold tablets. So I guess it still works.
And there is a lady here, she's still here, that lives in that house today on Main Street. We talked briefly about this last time. Is she here tonight? She was talking to me. So the lady that lives in the house on Main Street, which was the gold cure, wants to know more information. Oh, yes?
Is that where the Lawyers Art Place was then? That building?
No, that's across, this is across from the old village school. It's kind of bluish. It was a funeral home in later, so you know which one for us old
Yeah,
timers.
but Brian,
I'm young, I know.
Brian, isn't that's the one directly across from the dormitory today, though? It was in two
No.
different spots.
That one is not across from the dormitory today. This is,
This is one.
yes, sir, go right ahead.
Later on, an undertaker moved into that house, and he joined the Rotary Club, and I was a member of the Rotary Club, and so I said to him, what is your profession? And he said, I'm a boxer. I said, I looked at him, I said, what are you, a middleweight or a heavy? You're not a heavyweight. And I said, what kind of a boxer are you? That's when he said, I'm a funeral director. Took the bodies and put them in boxes. So he was a boxer.
Condensed milk, the Rogers, condensed milk, the next one, Rogers.
Back in the early days, Mr. Rogers had his home and had his laboratory down on what is now Rogers Street. And he worked and worked and worked because he was trying to take milk and condense it, because nobody had ever had condensed milk anywhere in the world. And he worked and worked and worked in his laboratory with all of his other help, and they came up with a way of condensing, taking milk and condensing it. And that was the first time in the world that anybody had ever condensed milk. And so Northville was real proud of Mr. Rogers, so they named the street after him. So that's why Rogers Street is named Mr. Rogers. But later on, he moved and opened up his business over by the cider mill.
And that's where this is.
That's the picture over by the cider mill. And so he became a very, very wealthy man. And you can tell more about the home of his son there.
Again, this is across the street from where Parmiter's cider mill is today. And the big, even when I was a kid, there was a big industrial building right next to the railroad tracks, and that's where they would put the condensed milk on the railroad. To my father's point, Mr. Rogers built a very nice house. In fact, where the original one, envision where between Rogers Street and Joe Denton Park is, down there by those apartments.
Excuse me, Brian, this is his son.
Yes.
His son.
Yeah. Well, that's where the original factory was. The son, which my father's referring to, built a beautiful house, which you still know today, on Novi Road and 9 Mile, where Shiro's is. That was the old Rogers mansion. So that money came from condensed milk. So it's kind of neat, as we said earlier, if you tear these things down, you can't rebuild them. It's nice to keep some of these things. Of course, it's a restaurant and other things, but it's great to have some of those old buildings. So that dates back pretty far.
I got a little bit more to add.
I bet you do. Yes, sir.
Mr. Rogers' son had a beautiful granddaughter. And so he said, honey, if you want to get married, come and get married in my house. And she said, well, Grandpa, I would get married in your house, but I've always visioned to come down a beautiful stairway. And I've seen it on the movies, how you come down the stairway. And he said, I tell you what, he said, if you get married in my house, I'll make a stairway for you. So he went ahead and got a carpenter, and they made a real nice stairway in there. So the night before the wedding, she eloped. But if you go out there for dinner, the stairway is still there. You'll see the stairway.
In Shiro's restaurant. The Icicle in Cabbagetown.
The which?
The Icicle House in Cabbagetown.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. I was real good in hearing until about 25 years ago. I said to my wife, that priest is not talking very good. I think you ought to talk a little louder. She said, you think it's your hearing? Oh, no. She said, well, go to Ann Arbor and find out. So I found out. And so from that time up to now, I'm a little bit beyond 75. I'm still here, but not as good. Okay, this house over here, people named Mrs. Rayson. It came in the winter time, and Mr. Rayson said, honey, watch when you go outside, because there's a big icicle hanging on right over the doorway. So if you go out, be real careful that icicle don't come down and maybe hit you and hurt you. Well, she forgot what he said, so she went going to go next door to have a cup of coffee with the neighbor. She slammed the door, and down came the icicle and hit her right on the head. and killed her. So she laid there in the snow, and everybody in Northville said, "Who was the lady who got hit by the icicle and died?" And they said that was a lady who grew cabbages in her backyard and went all around Northville selling cabbages. So that part of Northville right now is called Cabbage Town. And so that's the reason it got the name, Cabbage Town, Northville, Michigan. You can tell the story about Mrs. racing up at this on Halloween.
So at the cemetery, on the cemetery tour, it says the story on her tombstone, and I believe she is at the Katy Street.
Katy Street, right?
The old one that just got dedicated as a national cemetery because we date back to Civil War veterans and others in there. But they say the story about Mrs. Raisin, and I believe this is all true. I do know it's true, but an icicle from the house next door might have come down on her at that time. But it says the story on her tombstone, and again, she had cabbages, and there's a lot of Irish up in that side of town. We're part Irish. So that's Cabbage Town in the old days. And we're going to, the last session, we'll talk about the different sections in Northville.
Weren't they all dressed up too? Didn't you go to the other cemetery and they're all dressed up there?
Yeah, so to allude on to what my father was saying, a few weeks ago, they had a great tour. First, they dedicated this cemetery. People from all over the country came, and a big plaque is out there because it dates back to the original pioneers in Northville were buried right off here on Katy. But then the next generation from the mid-1880s and so went up to Rural Hill, and they had actors in about 6 different tombstones telling all about the history of those people. It was very interesting. I know it seems unique, but when you see that again, the Historical Society put it on, it was a great learning experience, and you can learn a lot about the town. And they were in costume, and they pretended they were the person, so they talked in first person. So yes, that just happened a couple weeks ago. Good catch, Mr. Turnbull.
Something else going on.
The cider mill. The cider mill.
Mr. Parmeter took his money from the Civil War and bought built the cider mill. And his son was called Cider. That was his nickname. And when I was in Northville High School, some of the Parmeter kids were in Northville High School at the same time I was. That cider mill has been there for a good many years. And when I was in senior in high school, we wanted to save some, make some money to go to Florida, go to Washington. And so I said, would you give us a price on a gallon of cider? And I said, how much is cider? At that time, it was $1 a gallon. They said, well, we'll sell it to you for 75 cents. You can make 25 cents on every gallon that you sell. So we got to have some apples though. So our whole class of 52 kids went out to an orchard and picked the apples, brought the apples into Parmeters. They squeezed the apples. We made phone calls to sell all the cider, and then we took it and delivered it. And we made 25 cents on each gallon. Big money.
The Opera House. The Opera House in downtown Northville.
Okay. There's an opera house in Northville. And it's right on the corner of Center Street and
Dunlap.
Dunlap. It was a tall 3-story building, and it would hold 700 people. In the opera house, beautiful, beautiful opera house. In 1975, the building was condemned, and so they said, well, we're gonna have a showing of it. So if anybody from Northville wants to go over and see the old Opera House, that we will have one day of going to see it. And so they had a stairway 3 stories up. And so everybody in Northville, including me and my wife, we went down there and went up to see the Opera House. So we got up there, and there was a beautiful opera house that had a stage and a beautiful eagle painted over the stage, and had a balcony up the back, and everything was just like it was back in the early days. And the opera house was there in the 20s. So I think around 1929 is when it was in the best. And a lot of people would get married over there. It was such a beautiful stage. You'd go over there for their wedding. But they were going to tear it down. And so Mr. Henry Ford came in and looked it over, and he said, "Hey, I like to have that for my Greenfield Village." So he went over and talked to the man that owned it, named Sam Pickard. And he said, "Mr. Pickard, how much do you want for your opera house?" And he said, $25,000. And he said, "You're a rich man." He said, "To you it's $30,000. Well, Mr. Ford is a real thrifty man. He said, "Before I give you $30,000, you can take that thing and take it down brick by brick and haul it away." And that's exactly what happened. Henry Ford has a opera house over at Greenfield Village, but it's not Northville's. It's another one very similar to it. So that's what happened to the opera house.
We'll talk in the next session about Henry Ford and his love affair in Northville. You know, he liked Northville a lot, so he wanted to bring that there, true story, but he did not. Again, this is the southeast corner of Dunlap and Center Street. There's like a little flower place. There used to be a Coney Island on that corner, so we can answer more questions in the future. The trolley cars. Would you like to tell any stories about the trolleys?
Oh, the trolley. Well, we went through the trolleys before.
We did.
But I'll just quickly. Northville had two trolley lines from about 30 years. Came in from about 1900 to 1929. It was the last of the streetcars in Northville. But they had one streetcar line that went from Detroit to Dearborn, then from Dearborn to Wayne, and then from Wayne to Plymouth, and then from Plymouth to Northville. The other streetcar line went from Northville to Farmington, and then over to Grand River, and then right down Grand River to Detroit. They had streetcars every hour on the hour. So you could get down to Detroit in an hour's time, every hour on the hour. And I remember riding the streetcars many times, once even though going over to Pontiac to visit my grandmother.
Good. And we talked quite a bit about the streetcars in a previous session.
Oh, let's talk about the crow's nest. We'll touch on that a little bit.
Briefly.
Okay. On Halloween time, maybe people in it more, on Halloween time, the kids grease the track. And there's a crow's nest, a big crow's nest where the band used to play on the corner of Main Street and Center.
Right in the middle of the street, big crow's nest. You've seen it on pictures.
You just have to go around it in a car. And so the streetcar came up Main Street and couldn't stop because the track was greased, and the kids greasing the track, and went right off the track and knocked over the crow's nest. And old Jim Spagnolia, who had a street shop in Northville, said, those are the kids. they greased these Italian. They greased the track. Down came the crow's nest.
Here's one of them that greased it. The Convalescent Center, the old hospital in Northville, Northville Hospital.
Northville is kind of interesting. At one time, every town had their own hospital. Northville had the largest hospital of any town around. Northville had their hospital, Plymouth had their hospital, and when they started trying to build St. Mary's Hospital, why, I was on the committee to try to raise the money for St. Mary's Hospital. And everywhere I went, they said, we don't need another hospital. I said, we've got a Sessions Hospital. I said, this area is growing. We need more hospitals. And so eventually, why, they did build St. Mary's Hospital. But anyhow, Northville Hospital was a baby hospital. It's the largest hospital around. And it still is the senior center, or senior home right now, and called the Star Manor.
Right on Main Street, across from Main Street School. They have a porch that goes out the front, but look at it, it's the same thing. You have the elevator shaft where it is still today. Again, Main Street on the north side. Yep.
So they had a room in there. Mr. Sessions' wife started having people in her home and taking care of them, and her husband said, hey, honey, if you're going to have people in your home, let's build a hospital. That's why they call it Sessions Hospital. But they had probably about, I'd say 12 or 14 different rooms for the different things. And they had 5 or 6 doctors and nurses, so it was a big deal. And my oldest son, Bob, who is now 75 years old, just a kid, he was born in there. And I was in the Marine Corps, and they paid a big sum of $50 to Sessions Hospital for having a baby. I think having babies now is a little bit more expensive. In those days, they wrote out a check. The United States Marine Corps wrote out a check to Sessions, $50.
And that crow's nest that he's talking about is right there in the middle of the street on Main Street.
Doesn't look like a band could have been very big.
Yeah, but this is bigger than you think. This, you could probably put, I don't know, 30, 35 people on. This is pretty big, and people would get up there for speeches and what have you. We will skip a couple here. Silver Springs, why don't you talk briefly on the Silver Springs water?
Yeah, we went through it all about Silver Springs the last time.
Right.
But they also had a Silver Springs pop, and they had about 4 different varieties of single Silver Springs pop. Down here where Asher's gas station used to be,
7 Mile and Rogers.
right on Rogers Street there. Why, we used to get on our bicycles. We lived on 222 Fairbrook, and we ride our bicycles up to the, it's always been a gas station there, and we get a bottle of pop. And they had orange pop, and they had silver pop, and they had 3 or 4 pops. It says right on there, Northville Silver Springs pop. And it's supposed to be the finest water around.
Yeah, I think we talked quite a bit about it. Train station, you want to talk anything about the train station?
Okay. The train station in Northville there was on the east side of the railroad, right by the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce, right by the fountain there. On the east side, it was the railroad station.
Other side of the well, where the Northville well is, other side of the tracks. Where you come around the turn.
So when our senior class went to Washington, why, we all went down there, got on the train, and went into Detroit. And from Detroit, we went into Washington DC, and for 3 days and 3 nights, and it cost us $35 for the whole thing, our hotel room and the railroad. And Mrs. Ida B. Cook, who they named the school after, she's a real good friend of mine.
The junior high, which is now for special needs up Taft Road and 8 Mile, that was the Cook School, where I went.
I said, Mrs. Cook, why don't you come and go to Washington with us? And she said, oh my golly, she said, I would love to, but I can't afford it. So we all chipped in, and we took her with us for free. Oh,
Yes, sir.
well, on that depot, not only did they have for passengers, the train would stop and pick up the passengers and take them every day down there. And they also had a, what do you call it, we had, for messages,
Telegraph?
telegraph station in there too.
Yeah, early on.
And they had they had there too.
Right there.
And I know I had a job there delivering the telegrams on my bicycle. So I'd go out there and I'd say to people, oh, it's awfully hot today. And they say, oh, well, we're going to give you a 10-cent tip then.
The Globe Furniture Factory.
The Globe Furniture Factory was right across the street from the Chamber of Commerce. And they made beautiful, beautiful furniture there. They also
By where the car wash is today. Automatic car wash. Mr. Turnbull, sorry.
say about the car wash.
It's about where it is, the automatic car wash. Just do the story. I'll let them know where it's at.
They also made school desks. I said, why? He said, Amelia Earhart is coming into Northville. And I said, who is Amelia Earhart? I'm just about a 10 or 12-year-old kid. And so he said, she is the best pilot in the world, and she's going to try to fly around the world in an airplane. From Northville, she's going to go to California, and then from California, she's going to take off and try to go around the world in an airplane. So, sure enough, we went out there, and my father said, would you like to take a ride in an airplane? And I said, oh, that'd be great. So yeah, there's a two-seater, and a pilot up in the front, and one seat behind him, all open. And I got up there and sat on my father's lap, and we flew all around Northville. First time I'd ever seen Northville from the air. We came down and waited a little while, and in came Amelia Earhart. And she stood in there by airplane, she waved to everybody, and said a few words, and then she got on her airplane and flew to California. And you all know the story about Amelia Earhart. You never have found out for sure what happened to her. But my own idea was the Japanese shot her down. They're getting ready for Pearl Harbor. And she saw some things that she shouldn't see, so they just blew her out of the sky.
Last one, the Old Methodist Church, the last slide. The Old Methodist Church downtown, which is on Dunlap and Center Street still today, where there's a few buildings, few businesses.
In 1923, the minister of the Methodist Church, that's where the Methodist Church was, he said to the congregation, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Mr. Turnbull, my father, is going to bring over his Atwater Kent radio, and he's worked all day Saturday to take an aerial and climb all the way up into the tower of the Methodist Church for an aerial, and he's going to try to get a thing called radio. Nobody had ever heard of radio in Northville. And they said, imagine 25 miles all the way to Detroit with no wires. You had to have a telephone with the wires, but nobody's ever heard of radio in Northville. over the air without any wires. So at 3 o'clock, the church was jammed with people. And so my father went over there, and imagine, I remember the old Atwater Kent radio, it had 5 or 6 knobs, and I think it had 12 big old tubes, and you had a speaker hanging on the wall. So my father was twisting all the knobs, and finally said, hold it, I think I got it. And so it came on the air. This is WWJ, Detroit, Michigan. And my father got a standing ovation. Imagine, that's the first time in 1923 they had radio. Look how far we've come since. Okay? That's it.
Thank you very much for your time and energy to be here tonight. I know we went longer, but my father has a lot of stories. So thank you very much.